Russia today ordering 4 Canadian diplomats to leave the country, and we're not the only ones getting the boot either. There was a parade of cars pulling up to the Russian Foreign Ministry in Moscow, diplomats from several Western countries being informed that they are being expelled, all of it in response to purging of Russian counterparts earlier this week over the poisoning of a former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia in the United Kingdom. For more, William Pomeranz is joining us. He is the Deputy Director of the Kennan Institute for Advanced Russian Studies at the Woodrow Wilson Center. William, always good to have you on. This was expected, correct?
This was absolutely expected, and they've matched the number of expulsions from Canada and the United States, so this was quite predictable.
What is the message the Russians are trying to send here, William? You do it to us, we're going to do it to you?
That's a traditional message, and that's what they're sending. I don't think there's much more to read into this. They're reacting to the actions taken by the Western countries. They cannot go unanswered from Russia's perspective, and Russia has now delivered an answer.
We also know there was this test as well of a missile today. What do you make of all of this maneuvering going on in Moscow?
Well, again, Russia is trying to show that it's relevant, that it is engaging in, has the ability to engage overseas, and that it is updating its nuclear arsenal. If you recall, President Putin in his State of the Nation address also talked about the advances that have been made in Russian technology as related to nuclear weapons. So once again, they're showing what they have and that Russia should not be taken for granted and will respond accordingly. Something
else I'm curious about, when the West expelled more than 150 diplomats, they said, in fact, these were military intelligence operatives, spies. These Western diplomats being kicked out of Russia, William, do we know if they are spies?
Well, I'm sure some of them are attached to embassies. It's not unheard of for the United States to attach people from the intelligence services to the embassies. So we can assume that some of them actually have connections with security services.
What impact does this sort of thing have when any country's diplomats are expelled from another country, just in terms of the practical nature?
Well, it makes communication that much more difficult. It also makes it more difficult to obtain visas to go to each other's countries. One of the actions taken by the Russian government was to close the St. Petersburg consulate. This is only going to make it more difficult for Russians to come to the United States. The United States, in turn, closed the Seattle consulate, thereby making it more difficult for Americans to go to Russia. It just makes it more difficult to engage in the diplomatic exchanges that could theoretically at least, lead to an improvement in U.S.-Russian relations.
And I guess it also cuts down on the so-called intelligence footprint. You just don't have as many operatives in that country to be able to be checking in on things, cultivating contacts, and on it goes.
That's absolutely true. That being said, at least in Western countries, there are lots of ways that Russians can come to those countries nowadays and engage in all types of different activities. So I don't think Russia is necessarily as reliant on the embassies and spies in the embassy as it has been in the past.
At the center of a lot of this, Vladimir Putin, a man you have studied very closely. And I'm curious whether, William, this is just the way it's going to be now for a while, with Vladimir Putin in control, that there will be a ratcheting up. I mean, how do you sort of de-escalate this?
It is confirmation that the status quo is going to be maintained. What I find particularly interesting is its impact on Russian domestic politics, in the sense that after the overwhelming victory of Vladimir Putin, I think he was kind of expecting a coronation, a very easy path to a celebration of his re-election. But with all the embassy firings, and in addition with this horrific and tragic fire in Kemerovo, there doesn't seem to be a coronation. Putin is already having to engage very deeply in order to defend his reputation and stay ahead of the message.
Yeah, the fire in Siberia killing more than 60 people, most of them children. Of course, a lot of questions there. William, thank you for your time today. Great to have you with us.
My pleasure.